This is a place of fervent readers. Everyone has strong views on grammar, punctuation, basketball, and a few other issues. Do you know anything about basketball?
Very well.
Okay, well this does not bode well. So Mary Norris is originally from Cleveland. Her early jobs included that of cashier, dishwasher, and, I want your full attention here. Her early jobs included that of cashier, dishwasher, and athlete's foot checker at her local public swimming pool. Realizing that there were limited possibilities for promotion at the swimming pool, she was drawn to Rutgers University for its reputation in agrarian sciences, before ultimately enrolling at the Rutgers Douglas College, where she felt drawn very much to the life of writing, and also the life of writing as opposed to the life of farming, which was another great interest of hers in her youth. And then she moved on to do a master's in English at the University of Vermont. Mary Norris joined the editorial staff of the New Yorker in 1978 and has been a copy editor and proofreader there for more than 30 years. She lives in New York at Rockaway. Between You and Me, Confessions of a Comma Queen is her first book, and welcome, Mary Norris.
Thank you very much, Bill. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
So I have a real treat in store for you. I like to think. First of all, I'm very honored to be here among such cultured and educated, discriminating people. And I have brought with me a document that I've never taken with me to such an event before. This is on loan from Jeffrey Frank, who is a member of the library. He couldn't be here tonight, but he entrusted me with, this is a framed proof of a page proof by Eleanor Gould, who was a famed New Yorker grammarian. And what you have, what you found on your chairs here, possibly to your horror, was my very amateurish Xerox and paste up of this proof so that you could follow along. Later you can come and venerate at the shrine here if you want. And I apologize for the look of it, but I did the best I could. This is why I'm not in the production or makeup department at work. Eleanor Gould read everything in galley at the magazine, and that, as you probably know, is the single column strip that things first appear in after they come out of manuscript and print. And it leaves plenty of room on both sides for revisions and for people to work on the piece before it goes to print for its final version. And in this instance, she's working on a page proof. And what that tells me is that possibly this was Eleanor's second go on this, and I can only imagine what the first one looked like. This is a piece by Lawrence Weschler. He's known as Bren, and he's a very exuberant writer. And his pieces for the New Yorker were often about some facet of torture or war. He wrote about, I remember it's the Solidarity movement in Poland, and I also remember he also wrote about art, and the piece that I remember was about an artist named Boggs, who painted currency, dollar bills, $50 bills, $100 bills, and then he would sometimes try to buy things with the currency and claimed that they were worth much more than the face value. So it was a very interesting piece. This piece is about the judge. It combines two of his interests, about a judge in The Hague before the trial of some of the criminals, people who committed war crimes in the former Yugoslavia during that horrible war. And this judge would go to calm down. He'd visit the Vermeer paintings in the museum in The Hague. It's called a Mauritshuis. I don't know how to pronounce it. Sorry. So it combines two of Ren's great interests, torture and art. And it may be no surprise that the editing process was torturous and tortuous. So first I would like to give you a little introduction to Eleanor Gould, the woman behind those marks. I first encountered her when I was in a department at the New Yorker called collating. This obviously is well before word processing or any of the copy editing programs now available on the computer. In collating, what we did was we transferred changes from the editor, the writer, usually two proofreaders, and a fact checker onto a clean proof for the printer. And it was a job that involved a lot of copying in pencil by hand. And it was from that I got spoiled and developed a great love of soft lead. So I turned into a very terrible pencil snob. And part of the book is also about pencils. I'm going to read a little bit about the book, from the book, to introduce you to Eleanor. The big challenge in collating was what were called Gould proofs. Eleanor Gould was a legendary New Yorker grammarian and query proofreader. She was a certified genius, not a member not just of Mensa, but of some Uber group within Mensa. And Mr. Shawn, William Shawn, the editor of the magazine at that time, it was about 1981, had complete faith in her. Eleanor read everything in Galley, everything except fiction, that is, which she had been taken off years earlier, as I understood it, because she treated everyone the same. Marcel Proust or Annie Proulx, Nabokov or Malcolm Gladwell. Clarity was Eleanor's lodestar, Fowler's Modern English, her Bible. And by the time she was done with a proof, the pencil lines on it looked like dreadlocks. Some of the fact pages were 90, fact pieces were 90 columns long, and Mr. Shawn took every query. My all-time favorite Eleanor Gould query was on Christmas gifts for children. The writer had repeated the old saw that every Raggedy Ann doll has "I love you" written on her little wooden heart. And Eleanor wrote in the margin that it did not, and she knew, because as a child, she had performed open heart surgery on a rag doll and seen with her own eyes that nothing was written on the heart. So Eleanor was kind of a tough cookie. Two things. Her, alter ego at the New Yorker was a woman named Lou Burke, who did read the fiction. And it's telling to me that whereas I'm here with an original frame Gould proof, and we have relics around the office, we have extant Gould proofs around the office, there are no extant proofs of Lou Burke to be found. No one has kept them. Lou, as I said, read fiction. She was more attuned to the voice of the author, and her suggestions, which were almost always taken, were minimalist and pragmatic. Probably for that reason, not a single one of her proofs survives. It's as if she got used up like a pencil. So, she was not at all celebrated in her lifetime, whereas Eleanor had. There were pieces about Eleanor that ran in the New York Times, and she was celebrated in her alumni magazine. She went to Oberlin. Lou Burke never went to college at all. She went straight from some school for wayward girls to a job in publishing in New York. So she worked at training in real life, and she's a crack proofreader. So neither of them was particularly easy to get along with, and I had to learn. These were my mentors, both of them. Lou was easier to ask questions because she did not mind an ignorant question. In fact, she would much rather you betrayed your ignorance by asking a question than that you stayed ignorant. So she'd have some patience with you if you asked an ignorant question, whereas Eleanor would always make you feel very small when you asked her anything. I'm going to read a little bit about, if I can find it. There's a little bit about hyphens. I have a chapter called Who Put the Hyphen in Moby Dick? I'm not going to tell you. You have to buy the book. It's the only suspense that exists in this book. When I was learning my way around on the copy desk, I noted the two schools of hyphenation. Eleanor Gould seemed to hyphenate everything, and Lou Burke hated anything extra. Eleanor once mystified me by putting a hyphen in blue-stained glass to make it blue-stained glass. When I asked her about it, she took on an oracular look and allowed that it was a difficult concept. I had the impression that I would never grasp it. Is it stained glass that is blue, or glass that is blue-stained? The answer would seem to be both. Eleanor was also a judicious withholder of hyphens. It was her judgment that a nuclear power plant did not call for a hyphen because it was both a power plant that happened to be nuclear and a plant that supplied nuclear power. There are other compounds that are not quite as double-jointed as nuclear power plants, but that still tempt people to put unnecessary hyphens in them. For example, high blood pressure. You can take it apart into high and blood pressure. That is, one can suffer from blood pressure that is high, but you cannot yoke together high blood and expect it to be high pressure. Someone might be tempted to hyphenate adult cable television, but what is an adult cable? You might refer to cable TV for adults as adult cable, but it's not the same thing. Now, Lou Burke, I have a little passage in here. I couldn't decide whether or not to hyphenate Bad Hair Day. I decided ultimately that it does not need a hyphen, and I decided it just because if Lou could make her own decisions, that Eleanor could make her own decisions, once they were both gone, I decided that Bad Hair Day could do without a hyphen. We now, whenever I will go to my boss sometimes to consult on whether we need a hyphen in this, and if you don't need a hyphen, she'll look at it and say, it's a nuclear power plant. So it's our code for things that don't need hyphens. We did sometimes feel as if we belonged to a strange cloistered order, the Sisters of the Holy Humility of Hyphens. So I'm going to turn now to this thing that you have in front of you, and we'll run through it, and there may be some things that are they're just too complicated to go into, and I'll go as far as I can, and then you actually should be getting paid to read this thing, but happens to people who work there, and it doesn't happen anymore, unfortunately. We've had to absorb the work of Eleanor. You could not hire another Eleanor Gould, so we read things, the okayers, who are the proofreaders who are ultimately responsible for making sure that a piece goes to press with no mistakes in it. We've taken on the job of reading things in galley, too, so that there isn't so much to do when a piece goes into proof. I think it was David Remnick who said that Eleanor Gould could find 5 mistakes in a 4-word sentence. And the sentence was probably by Remnick. So first, you could see all these lines. I'm afraid they're a little hard to make out, but you can come and study this more closely later. But the first that she does is the word back. I was in The Hague several weeks back. Eleanor changes that to ago. That is her preference. Back is more colloquial, but ago is more end-to-end. Ago is more formal, and I believe that made it into the final version version. We have plenty of ways to check. Yes, Go made it into the final version. So, I was sitting in The Hague several weeks ago. Sitting in on the preliminary hearings of the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal. In particular, those related to the case of Duško Tadić. In particular, she has changed to specifically, and she has a note on there that says ambiguous. I'm not sure why in particular is ambiguous, but I do believe that specifically is an improvement. So, and the editor thought so too, that was Jeff Frank. So we made it specifically those related to the case of Duško Tadić. You might notice the lack of diacritical marks on the name there, and the New Yorker is famous for putting all the extra marks in that we possibly can, but we drew the line at these Slavic names. We just didn't, they didn't tell anyone how to pronounce it because nobody knew what those marks meant. And so we just decided in this one instance, that is all of former Yugoslavia, we're going to leave out the accents on names. And forgive me if I don't pronounce it right. So, the only one of over 40 accused war criminals, Eleanor has circled over and substituted more than, and that's a rule that we all learn. It should be more than, not over. It's a usage that, although the Associated Press, which makes pronouncements on these things, last year accepted more than in place of over because it's been just, it decided, the Associated Press said you can use over. Generally, our thought was always that over had more of a dimension to it. It meant on top of, and more than, there was no ambiguity, it just meant more than. So Eleanor changed that to more than. One of the things I learned to do from reading Eleanor's proofs. Oh, I forgot to say that we had at work in the old days something called a junk box. And when a proof was, when everything had been used, when the proof was used up and had been thrown away, we didn't ever throw it away. We put it in the junk box. And the people who were in training would take things out of the junk box and study them. We'd study the junk, and that's how we learned. That's how I learned that you couldn't say over 40 or whatever. You have to say more than 40. So more than 40 accused war criminals, and Eleanor has added a whom here, whom the tribunal has actually been able to get its hands on. And now I can't tell exactly what she's done, but she's pointing out here that it's a parentheses, right? She's pointing out that these parentheses, well, she points out the parentheses and makes 2 points. First, farther down in the parentheses, there is a dash. And she thinks that's a bit much to have dashes within, she writes, avoid parens inside dashes, especially when non-parenthetical. So this parentheses here, the main portion of whose trial will actually be getting underway sometime in the months ahead. The whole point of this piece is the trial that is getting underway. So this is not parenthetical. This is not something you bury in a parentheses. So Eleanor suggested taking that out of the parentheses and making it something like, and I talked with some of the principal figures. How did it come out in the piece? Yes, I talked with some of the principal figures involved in the unprecedented judicial undertaking. Now, at one point, and there's a big circle around at one point and an arrow going all the way down to the bottom of the column, and with that, Eleanor is pointing out a repetition of the expression at one point, which Wren is awfully fond of, I have to say. There's at least 3 instances of it on the page. She's not changing it in the first instance, she's just flagging it, and that's what that arrow means. At one point, I was lunching. Now, Eleanor does not like to lunch, as it were. So she suggests at one point, I had lunch, which I believe is an improvement, and the editor did take that. At one point, no, there's a compromise. At one point, I was having lunch with Antonio Cassese, a distinguished Italian journalist who has been serving for the past 2 years as the president of the court. I don't think she has any big changes after that. He'd been rehearsing. Eleanor suggested that there should be a dash, and he rehearsed. What Eleanor was saying is that this is not so important. She doesn't think that it's so important that the writer had lunch, okay? And for Wren to devote a whole sentence to the fact that he had lunch seemed a bit much. So she tried to put some of that in dashes and to continue the sentence so that the sentence got all the way to what was important. That is, that he had to take care of these grueling things. The editor decided not to take that change. I see he left it in, he left the one sentence devoted to having lunch all to itself. But Eleanor would have said, she would have put all the facts about Cassese within dashes, a distinguished Italian jurist, blah, 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 had an international panel of 11 judges, dash, and he was rehearsing for me some of the more gruesome stories that have crossed his desk. So now here, do we have something like maybe not the most gruesome? But that sentence had she changed. Instead of maybe not even the most gruesome, just the sorts of things. That became, in Eleanor's suggestion, maybe not the most gruesome, but the sort of thing he has to contend with. And Eleanor's note on her proof is emphasis. So she doesn't want you to stop on the word gruesome. She wants you to get past gruesome to the end of that clause. Maybe not the most gruesome, but the sort of thing he has to contend with. It's a way of compelling you to read further, to change the emphasis of the sentence. And of course, sorts of things becomes sort of thing. It goes from plural to singular, and you can find instances of that in all kinds of usage books. And it is something I tried to master for reading the junk in the box, but I never really did, to tell you the truth. So, farther down, actually what happens here, there's a very gruesome sentence, of course. The story, for instance, of a man who was forced to witness the repeated rapings and eventual murder of his wife and two stepdaughters, their throats finally being slit right before his eyes. That has changed considerably here, and Eleanor's changes on it become irrelevant. What bothers her a lot, though, is the story, for instance, of a man. She would prefer that be changed to one story, for instance, concerns a man. Eleanor didn't like the sentence fragment. She didn't get why there would be a sentence fragment. In this case, it's probably Wren Wester's style. Wren added his exuberant a way of talking as he does in writing, and things came out in bursts. And the sentence might come out in a burst, it might be a fragment. But anyway, what happened here, and we can skip over a lot of this, because all of what is in the original turns out to be the writer paraphrasing the judge, and probably through the checker or somehow in the process of editing the piece, it came out that Wren was paraphrasing the man so closely that it might as well quote him directly. So that's what happened. The piece was put back into the original words of the judge. And that's why, for instance, there's another, Eleanor suggests there's a little TR in the margin, which is transpose, and it means, she wanted to make would simply be into would be simply, which makes logical sense, but in the printed article it's within a quotation, and the language cannot be changed once it's in a quotation, which is sometimes we might like to do that. So, now, is this still here when we get to which they blithely proceeded to do? Yes, this is I'm sorry for the terrible material, for the content, which is so violent. But there is, which they blithely proceeded to do after simply be. Eleanor's note on that is she wants it to become, and they did so. And she makes the note antecedent, which is a reference to the which. Which, as a relative pronoun, should refer back to something specific. And we now allow this, but it can't really, technically, grammatically, and according to Eleanor, all this stuff about slitting the throat and all could not just be reduced to which. So she changed it to, and they did so. And she adds her little note about such blithely's have lately been coming up all over the place. And if you ever heard Eleanor talk, you can hear her saying that. One of the famous things she used to write on the proofs was, "Are we losing our mind?" She saved that for a precious occasion. Now we're down to the at one point, which has been retained. Is alleged to have supervised the torture and torment of a particular group of Muslim prisoners, at one point forcing one of his charges. But again, in the final version, this is in the words of the judge, and he used the at one point, so what can you do? So you've got a repetition, and it's not the author's fault. Eleanor also wanted to take out this terrible thing about the guy being, one of his charges to emasculate another, dash, italics with his teeth. Very, very terrible. Eleanor just wanted to take out the dash. She just thought it was enough. The content was really violent enough. The italics were remarkable enough. It didn't need this extra dash to give it any more drama than it already had. Did Eleanor succeed in ridding us of that dash? No. Okay. Well, Wren and the editors stuck with it, with their idea that this was worthy of all the drama that they could infuse in it. So, where are we? It was my job to interpret these proofs, and it was like reading tarot cards some of the time. It was actually very hard, and even with galleys and plenty of space on both sides, it all curled down the sides of the pages. So, of course, she added an "and" to connect clauses. Let's see, where's that? The victim subsequently died. The biter went mad is on the original proof that we have, not in the final version. But the person who spoke that also had used the and this is just Eleanor, making sure that such a condensed way of putting two clauses together isn't just wasted. So she thinks it needs an "and" there, and she was right. So did the judge who said the sentence. So finally, we're to the second column. Stories like that. What does she say? Stories like that, a lone judge's daily fare. Now, Eleanor wants to make a sentence out of that. Stories like that were a lone judge's daily fare. And her irritation slips in the marginal note. Why all these incomplete sentences? And the answer is because that's the way the writer wanted it. He wrote in a kind of staccato style. It was simply a style. And I believe that they did keep that in there. Stories like that, one judge's daily fare. Yeah, they kept that. So I found myself asking is the next thing that Eleanor brings out, right? At one point, I found myself asking, she suggests, how about I asked? And that is an example of extra verbiage, whereas Wren will take out, verbs. He'll put in extra things like I found myself asking, and I think editor did accept that. It's true that that puts more emphasis on the reporter than is necessary. You just should be disappearing more when you're the reporter, or at least that's one theory of journalism. And regularly forced to gaze, Eleanor wants that to become, I'm being regularly forced, but the editor made a different change here. Regularly obliged to gaze into such an appalling abyss. How are you kept from going mad? So this is another compromise that came across. Originally, Red wrote he himself had kept from going mad. Eleanor suggested he had kept himself from going mad too, and the result in the magazine was a compromise that came out. He had kept from going mad himself. And kind of an amazing use of the reflexive pronoun himself, different ways that it can be used, and I think what they finally settled on was the best possible way, certainly the most economical. Now the next thing is something that we describe, this is one of another one of Eleanor's trademarks. Ah, he smiled. Becomes, ah, he said, and smiled. And one of her trademarks was in the column to write, and you can barely make this out, I'm sorry, but neat trick is what she wrote. You can smile and say ah at the same time. I mean, try. I suppose it could be done. But neatest trick of the week was one of the headlines for the New Yorker's news breaks. You know, those little bits that we would use to fill space and incidentally point out the mistake of another publication, and that made us very self-conscious about our own mistakes. But this was a great way of getting an editor and a writer to change something. Do you want to actually commit something that could be turned into a news break in your own magazine? So when they saw that neat trick, they, well, guess we should fix this. So, and anyway, you know, all of those words that are used instead of said are often picked on because writers use them for variety, but it should disappear. It just is an attribution, and said is usually the best thing. Grumble, guffaw, you know. All of those are too distracting in the end. And now there's a squiggly line from the Moritz House Museum up to the top of the page. And what Eleanor wants to know is if it's okay to leave that museum, lowercase m, lowercase, or if it's part of the formal name and museum should be uppercase. And that's a query for the checker. And apparently it was okay to have it lowercase. But that reminds me to point out that all of Eleanor's queries have little question marks next to them. I'm not sure you can see them on here, and even on the original, they were hard to make out because she made every query had a question mark. Just to show, you don't have to do this. This is my suggestion. That's why they're called queries. And it was polite. And Eleanor's question marks got very impressionistic. Just you couldn't tell them question marks at all. And I've taken up that. I do that a lot myself, you know. It's hard to make a firm question mark, and everybody should know that that's what you're doing with that little mark up there. So now another famous old bugaboo, this thing about the numbers sheet that this a total of 21 out of 35 pictures. Where is this here? Along with a plurality of all the others, all the other extant Vermeers, another parentheses here, 21 out of the 35 total canvases attributed to the incomparable Dutch master, gleaned from museums around the world. Well, there are a bunch of problems with that. One of them is it's in parentheses, and again, this is not parenthetical, this is impertinent. The whole point here is going to be that all of these, how many are there? 35 Vermeers are going to be gathered together in a museum for the first time. and they're going to travel to Washington, and the author has just snuck that in there, and she wants it to be more prominent. That's why she says this is indirection, to just sneak in this total of 35. So the final change on that came out a little differently, along with a majority. It's good that we lost the word plurality, even though Eleanor let that go. Out of a total of 35 pictures attributed to the incomparable Dutch master. So it's good that we got rid of some of that language. The total pictures seemed a little strange. And there's a reference to the first column again, CF first column, meaning that yet again we have dashes within parens, and that we shouldn't have parens to begin with because this is not parenthetical. Okay? Wintering she didn't like, it's a non-starter. The idea of them spending a glorious winter in Washington, D.C. is a little absurd. And she also wants the exact dates of the show. And you can't see this on the copies that I gave you, but she actually had to resort, this is pretty rare, to a different color of lead to make her squiggle up the page and put the final dates of the thing in there. So I think you probably get the idea. One other thing that I'll point out farther down in there is the word seamlessly. There and at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, an aptness that could hardly have applied as seamlessly to any other artist. Eleanor makes the point that there are no degrees of seamlessly. It's seamless or it is not. And I can't remember what they did instead. Yes. So, anyway, whatever she decided. Oh, she said felicitously. You have applied as felicitously to any other artist. Surely I go. She lowercases the V in Van Gogh or Hallstorm. I don't know how to pronounce any of these names. Or, well, you fill in the blanks. That's very red as well. And the only change she wants there, she wants a space after the dash and before the well begins. So that is all I'm going to do on this column. It was enough to take up about a half hour. I will just read another passage from my book about what I would say was a little bit of a problem sometimes in Eleanor. And that is, what would happen if she went crazy? You know, when I was working on a Gould proof, transferring changes from Eleanor's proof onto a reader's proof, when I was in collating, I had the unsettling thought, what if Eleanor ever loses it? What if all these commas and hyphens and subtleties of usage prove to be the products of a benign delusion? During the Reagan administration, everyone knew that Reagan had some form of dementia, but no one could do anything about it. The country was running on automatic. What if that was the case with Eleanor in the New Yorker? She was getting old, and she went deaf in her later years. So she was tragically isolated from the sounds of speech that were represented in the words she groomed. There was not a single thing anyone could do about it. No one would enter the copy department and say to Eleanor, drop the pencil and step away from the desk. We were in her thrall, as the nation was in Reagan's thrall. I jumped up and went to my boss's office and said, what if Eleanor goes crazy? From the expression on her face, you're only figuring this out now? I knew that we were all well advanced down the path. So I'm going to finish up here with some passages about Eleanor from this book by Gardner Botsford. My book is not a memoir of the New Yorker completely. We thought the world didn't need another one of those. It's part instruction, part New Yorker anecdotes, and part personal history. And I owe it to my editor that he was able to find a balance of those things, and also to the fact that nobody in bookstores knows quite where to shelve it. And Gardner Botsford was an editor at the New Yorker, a wonderful editor at the New Yorker, and his book is also a really nice blend. It's a memoir, but it's a memoir of his time in the war. He was a hero in D-Day in the Second World War. It tells that story. It tells the story of his upbringing in New York. He was the son of Ruth Gardner and I guess Robert Botsford. I don't remember his father's first name, but his mother married Raoul Fleischman, and so he was brought up with them, with a stepfather. And the stories of his young manhood when he went to debutante parties and the clothes that he picked out, and especially, they're just hilarious. They'll break you up. But also he tells the story of his career at the New Yorker, and especially of the succession war that happened when William Shawn did not appoint a successor that suited everybody, that suited anybody, and it became apparent that William Shawn really thought he was immortal and wouldn't have to be replaced. But Gardner has a few passages about Eleanor. He says, and when he was editing there, that certain writers were, they were not alone in caring what happened to their copy. And he writes, I soon learned about the difficulties of trying to steer a course between, on the one hand, the Scylla of the demands and suggestions from Shawn, Ross, Eleanor Gould, staff grammarian, and the fact-checking department, and on the other, the Charybdis of preserving the beset and badgered writer's prose. I don't think it was ever easy to be a writer at the New Yorker. So it's quite funny, all the hands that would go to work on the proof. This is just one example of one Eleanor Gould proof. And Gardner goes on to say, Eleanor Gould had me completely mesmerized for a long time. She had begun her career as an organic chemist, not as a grammarian, and you can't beat an organic chemist for logic. Nearly a week after falling into the Rand pothole, that's a story he has just told, I did the same thing again. Walcott Gibbs had included in his theater column a review of a play that had already closed, something he rarely did. He started his review, while it is not my custom to dissect dead cats, I must say, somewhere out there, recently at the Velasco, that Miss Gould fell on this sentence at once, proposing to delete the word dead. A pleonasm, she wrote in the margin. You can't dissect a live cat. The point was not only classy, I had to look up pleonasm in a dictionary, but beyond argument, you certainly cannot dissect a live cat. So I took out dead, and the next day, when I read in the revised proof, while it is not my custom to dissect cats, I wondered whether Gibbs would just have me fired or would shoot me first. He did neither. He put the dead back in without comment. And that was the way that Gardner, in his very classy way, would correct a mistake if I made it. He would just restore whatever I had done wrong. So he was a hero to me. And I always thought highly of his way of handling Gould proofs. You know, you don't take everything, and not everything in language has to be logical. And certainly humor gets lost if you're rigidly logical about everything. So that's all. I'm going to save time now for you to ask me questions. Thank you.
So, Mary would be delighted to answer questions. Let's go for it.
Yes, sir.
So, as somebody who's also done a lot of copy editing and regular editing and was brought up on the elements of style, I wonder in your experience whether you found that authors you worked with repeatedly ever learned not to split infinitives, not to work in the passive voice, etc., the things that you presumably kept editing out of their prose?
Well, that used to bother me, especially when I was in collating, and there was a piece by Jonathan Schell about the nuclear power button, and Jonathan Schell could not spell annihilate. He always left out that second L in annihilate, and you'd have to, over and over again, I had to write out annihilate with that extra L. And I asked once, why don't they, I asked someone I was working with, don't they ever reread this stuff and see what Eleanor's done and fix it themselves? And the person I asked said, well, it's a good question. And I came to my own conclusion, it's not their job. It just is not their job. And if they did it themselves, where would Eleanor be? Where would I be? We wouldn't have a job to do it. And as a writer myself now, I am dependent, I'm grateful for copy editors who catch the things that as a writer, you can't do it all at once. So I'm very merciful toward writers, even toward Red West. They have the job of creating the writing is hard enough, and they can rely on editors to refine it for them. Yes?
So you talked about the line, I found myself asking, and how the journalist or the writer is supposed to be stepping back and the story step forward. I'm wondering if you've noticed, I have noticed the journalist or the reporter is now much more forward in stories. Have you noticed that in the New Yorker, that they're allowing the journalist to be a character in the story almost, or not so? Yeah.
Yes, the new journalism, of course, was using fictional techniques on reporting, and I've noticed it in a lot of pieces, and it depends on the graces of the writer, I think. Sometimes I've tried to take those things out, and I've been told that the editor-in-chief had them put in there. So part of the piece is often supposed to be about the process of reporting.
Yeah, and that's the difference.
Yes, it has grown up that way. Some writers get away with it better than others, I think. Yes?
I read your book and I was cheered to learn that Pauline Kael and John Updike, for example, turned in immaculate copies. I also read when I was a teenager Brennan Gill's book at the New Yorker and got the impression that everybody who worked at the New Yorker was a utterly polished writer who turned in perfect prose. And now, I guess through your book in other ways, I'm learning that's not the case at all. And somebody like Eleanor Gould is not really just copy editing, she's line editing. So I wondered if you thought there was a sort of process by which women cleaned up after men. The New Yorker, by having writers who refuse to learn how to spell because there's somebody else going to come along and fix it.
Did I give you such a bleak impression from that? Goodness. Well, let's see. There are those writers whose copy came in, and there are still writers whose copy comes in nearly pristine. It's very, there's nothing to do, and so you get lulled while you're reading it. It's a pleasure to read, and but you do still have to stay alert because there might be something wrong, and you're liable to miss it. The thing about the cleaning up, for a long time, I think it was the case. There were women who did the tidying up, and Eleanor was much more than a copy editor and a proofreader, and a grammarian. She really did supply a lot of her own language. Some would say too much of her own language. And that's why the contrast with Lou Burke is important, because Lou Burke would never do that. She would think about it really hard and try to make a minimal change and keep the writer's language. Whereas, but she was working with fiction. Eleanor felt, all you can do is be true to your own sensibility. When it's my job to do those things, if I'm curious about something, I'll put a note in the margin. When did this happen? When did he die? What did he die of? And the editor might groan, think, uh-oh, this is going to take the checker another 45 minutes to find out. But as I said, all you can rely on is your own sensibility as a reader. If that's what makes you curious, and you think other readers are going to be curious about it when they sit down to read the magazine, you suggest that it go in. And the changes that Eleanor made, as I said, some of them were to keep the reader going. And that's what I see myself doing if I make a change. It's to make the prose compelling, make somebody not want to stop. But there's also a kind of a pact between editors and writers, between copy editors and writers, where it was kind of a betrayal, in a sense, for me to write this book, and I tried my best not to name names, and I tried my best, unless I was praising, and it's even terrible of me to be exposing the first draft of Rem Weschler tonight, but I don't think Rem would mind. It's in the interest of something larger. But my point is that all this is happening behind closed doors, and that you're getting a glimpse of it is kind of an anomaly. And I'm still not sure that we should be doing this, because there is, the editors don't say, oh, I had to cut out a horrible lump out of his prose. That just falls to the floor and nothing is ever said again. I've certainly written plenty of that kind of stuff myself and tried to resuscitate it and found, no, this really deserved to be cut. So, yes, Roger.
Well, I'm an old man, and I'm a survivor of about 100 school cruises. This is a bad shock to see one again here tonight.
I should have warned you, sorry.
What I want to say, Mary, is that you mentioned Georgia as being a hero, but I think that every New Yorker writer with any experience comes to count on heroines like you, or heroes like you. And it's part of this process of writing, because writing is so damn hard. And you write something, you think it's just okay, the best I've done is good. And then you get a proof, and you're doing a Google proof, and you can't bear it. But she shows that we got to go, it's a little harder than you think. It's going to make it better. And every New Yorker writer may begin to rely on an editor and a Google, Mary Norris, and Goldstein. And the problem is that writing well and writing clearly is very hard. And you people are the ones that keep telling us that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a great Roger Angel, and I've had the pleasure of working on a lot of Roger's pieces too. And his point is that it's a collaborative process.
Yeah,
and people don't know that. Writers, people writing for the New Yorker for the first time might be a little defensive, but they soon learn that we're there to help, and we really are making them look good, or we're doing our best to make them look good. And if they don't like something, we know it's their name on the piece, and we back off. Yes?
When you were writing your book, did you find your knowledge of editing helpful, or did you find it inhibiting? Sentence by sentence, were you thinking more about what you wanted to say, or how it would be edited?
Well, my book, too, was a collaboration. I had a wonderful editor at Norton. His name is Matt Weiland. And I was able, with him, to just turn back into a writer completely. And I just blatted things out. And I said things that I didn't edit. And it's really, just like your relationship with Anne a little bit, Roger. Roger will often take something to Anne Goldstein and they'll go over it together. I was able to give things to Matt, and he would reshape them for me and take stuff out. It would be very inhibiting. And when I first started trying to write for the New Yorker, I would try to Gould myself. And it was terrible, I never got past the first paragraph of any piece. Because that was the enemy. And, I don't like thinking of myself as the enemy. But if you try to do that to yourself first, you get all bound up. And so, of course, my tendency is to get into more and more detail. And when I reread, I add details, I change details, I fix details, I change the emphasis. And the editor's job in this case was larger than that. He saw the big picture and was able to help me move things around within that big picture and then I could entrust the little things to someone else. And of course, I had to be part of that process too, in a more detached way, but it's very hard to detach yourself from your own stuff. Yes?
How much time was spent on a page like that? First Eleanor going over it and then the correction thing.
How much time did Eleanor spend, or did I spend deciphering?
Both.
Well, Eleanor just came into the office and sat down at her pile of galleys and went, zip, zip, zip. She hardly looked up. She stopped to have some carrots and peanut butter at lunchtime and then just went right back to it. And she would get through 90 columns, I would say, maybe it took her 2 days, maybe a day and a half. I know when I was once left alone in collating because the boss was out and nobody on the copy desk would help me, I had to do 90 columns of moving Eleanor's changes onto a fresh proof. And it took me until something like 3 in the morning from 10, it was an 18-hour day, I would say. And I was exhausted afterwards. And I went to bed. In my dreams, I'm drawing the lines from words onto documents. It was very difficult. Maybe one more question?
I'm curious about, in terms of employing now proofreaders, are you finding that there are enough competent people who have had a background in grammar? Because I was in publishing for 30 years, and I would always ask when I was hiring people, when did you study grammar? When did you learn punctuation? Never. Every one of them said they had never had anything in school. So where are they coming from now?
Well, I don't know that I had it in school either, but you learn those things, good punctuation and diction, from reading good things. And I read literature. I eventually started reading the New Yorker, but I came to the New Yorker pretty late. I was already in graduate school. So I really think that's how people learn. To learn grammar, I studied German when I was in college. 1 year of German taught me all I know about English grammar, and that's how I got it. How people do it now, they still read things, they still are avid readers, and they pay attention, and I'm happy to say that there are young people at the New Yorker who are passionate about this stuff. They want to learn style. They're always asking us to show that there's no junk box anymore because of the word processing system. The editors enter the changes themselves. We don't have to put them on a proof and send them to the printer, and they just toss the proofs afterward. And some enterprising young copy editors go looking for those proofs. They ask editors to save them, and they still look at them. Where the difficulty is right now is on the website, because on the print magazine we still have the luxury of a full week to put a magazine to send it to the printer, and we have time to read something multiple times. But on the website, the people who work there, where we're proofreading 9 articles a week, they're proofreading 40 articles a day. That stuff gets churned out really fast. And they too are really interested and really want to learn, and the object now is to raise the level of the internet to the level of prose, not to have the level of the print magazines thing to the level of the internet. So I'm hopeful. I think they're still getting some good training, and the main thing is that they're interested and they're even passionate about it.
So before we bid farewell to Mary, Mary's book is outside. She will be sitting at this desk and will be delighted to inscribe